Okay, this podcast is long overdue. I had Katie Sharp back on the podcast, and we were talking before we started. I think the last time I had her on, we were talking about James Bouknight. So that's how you know it's been a while. But this is long overdue. Katie, all things stats, go-to for anything. UConn, baseball, you name it, she's got a stat for you. So I figured what better time than now to bring her back on. So Katie, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on, Jared. I'm a huge fan of your podcast. I love listening to you. Your interviews with Caravan, Alex have been great. And obviously, I try and interact in Twitter Spaces as much as possible and on UConn Twitter. So, big fan of yours, and I'm real happy to be here.
Oh, thanks. Thanks. I appreciate that. And the compliments go both ways there. I'm really excited to talk with you about this team because this has been a really fun UConn team and a fun season so far. So I feel like we've got a lot to talk about. And I know you've been posting stats throughout the season and some that have just blown my mind about what this team has done and what they've been able to do up until this point. How impressed have you been with this team based on your statistical look at this team?
God, I mean, I'm just at a loss for words. I really, I love to post stats after games, during games and stuff. And sometimes I'm just like, I don't know what else to say. Like, I don't know how to describe this team as being so balanced, so resilient, so good, so efficient. Just so few weaknesses, so many ways that they can beat you. It's just it's fun though. It's a challenge to try and find new stats to kind of describe how good this team is. I don't want to inflate their egos or anything, but things are looking really good, and it's hard to find faults with this team, although there are some. But yeah, it's been really exciting. I never could have imagined this. I mean, if you thought at the beginning of the season losing, Jackson and Sonogo and the core of that team from last year,
Yeah.
that they'd be able to kind of just be even better this year. The stats are saying they're better. It's been amazing. It's been a lot of fun to follow this team this season.
So you look at this team, and I think one thing you alluded to, based on what they lost last year, what they brought back in the new pieces that have come in, it's once again another deep UConn team that just has so many guys capable of really contributing on any given night. What about the depth of this team has stood out to you when you look at it?
Wow. I mean, it's just incredible that they're starting five. When they're healthy is just it's really incomparable to any other starting five, I think, in the country. The stat that I've put out there is using the Evan Maya player ratings, which I really like, and we can get into that later in the podcast. But right now they've got five players in the top 31. So Cam Spencer is their fifth worst player. He's at 31. No other team has more than two in the top 31. Now, Tennessee does have three in the top 35, but their best player is, I think, 14th. And, they snuck in a couple people in the 30s. So not truly comparable, but UConn, five players in the top 31 of those player ratings. And another stat that I found, which I found incredible as well, was they're the only team in the country that has five players with at least 15 games played that are averaging both 10 points per game and 4 rebounds per game. So on both ends of the court, 10 points, 4 rebounds per game. They've got five players doing that with 15 game leads. They're the only team in the country, not even some, random Southland team or whatever, from me that like something like that. Which really that stat blew my mind. That they have the depth not only in scoring, but also, kind of on the boards as
Yeah.
well.
No, I think that goes to really show what this team could do. Before we dive into more, I know you mentioned Evan Maya. Let's get that out of the way here. So as people are listening and you're starting to rattle off some of these stats, they can have a better understanding of it. I know when you're talking about college basketball, everyone's talking about a number of different stats, whether it's Ken Palm, Torvik. Evan Maya is another one that's commonly brought up. Take us through what you see in Evan Maya and just give people some background there.
Yeah, I really like what he's done with his ratings. He kind of, I think I think his site started just maybe last year or 2 years ago or something like that. He's only been on the scene for a little bit. But really what I like to do is because kind of what he does is he incorporates three main components. So when he does his player ratings, so he uses box score metrics, kind of like the stuff you see in the stats, but a little bit more advanced. He also uses play-by-play data, which allows him to look at possession by possessions,
Okay.
players on and off the court, right? That's really important. And he also incorporates historical information too. So he'll look at recruiting ratings, what players have done in previous seasons. And he kind of puts that all into one little, big algorithm and kind of spits out a player rating. And he does this also with teams as well. But we'll focus on the players because that's what we're talking about. And so really what the other thing I like about it is that it quantifies both the offense and the defense, right? So that's really important. I think, and a lot of stats don't get that. And it adjusts for the strength of the opposition. So it looks at what players are on the court with him, but also what players are on the other side of the court, the other team. And then obviously they're all tempo free, so it's all efficiency based.
Yeah.
That's pretty normal for most stats, but definitely good to have there. It's all based on possessions and not on games or something
Yeah.
like that. So I just really like the way that he breaks it down by the possessions, and that he's able to incorporate all of those statistics, and really come up with what I think is the best player rating out there right now.
Yeah. So as you're looking at those player ratings, I know you mentioned how many UConn players are in that, top 31 there. For those who haven't had a chance to play around or look at this data, give us a little breakdown of that UConn roster and where they rank within those.
Yeah. So let me just pull it up here. So it's pretty balanced. So you've got the top player, I think, pretty not obvious, but is Clingan. Even though he hasn't, which is pretty amazing because he hasn't played as many possessions, obviously, as anybody
Right.
else. And they are, it is sort of based on weight. It is weighted towards playing time too. So players that have more possessions have a higher rating as well. So the fact that he's able to do what he's done in the limited time, he's the number 2 player in the country. which is pretty cool. And then another surprising one who we'll probably talk about a little bit later is Steph Castle, who's at 12.
Yeah.
And then you've got Tristan Newton at number 19. So you've got 3 players in the top 20, which
Yeah.
is pretty cool. And then it doesn't drop off much farther, because then you've got Caravan at 30 and Spencer at 31.
Yeah.
So they're really tightly bunched, which is very different from any other team. So I've looked at, kind of the other players, the other top teams that you'd say, in the country, and you look at Purdue, right?
Yeah.
So, they've got 5, but their 5th best player is Lance Jones, and he's 96th,
Yeah.
right?
Big jump.
And Houston, their 5th best player is Terrence Arsenault, who's 77th, but he's out for the season,
Yeah.
right? So their next best player is Joseph Tugler. I'm sorry, I don't really know him very well, but he's 98th,
Yeah.
right? And even a team like UNC, their 5th best player, Cormac Ryan, is 198th.
Yeah.
And Tennessee, their 5th best player is 206th. I mean, when you look at all these teams, they're ranked, they play great. I watch
Yeah.
a lot of college basketball. They're terrific teams. They're really, really good. They just don't, the drop off is extreme for a lot of those teams. They may have 2 or 3 other good players, right? So there's a bunch of people that have 2 in the top 20 or 3 in the top 30 or something like that.
But to have your whole starting line.
But when you've got your whole starting lineup
Yeah.
as if you look at it, 1 through 31, right? So every 5th player is a UConn player, right?
Yeah.
I mean, on average, right? You know what I mean?
That's
It's pretty
crazy.
amazing.
I think one guy you mentioned there that I'd love to dive into a little bit more, especially of late, given his emergence, and that's been Steph Castle. You mentioned he's number 12 in the rankings, and he really had a little bit of a quiet stretch. He had been injured, was getting back into game shape and really showing what he can do. And the past 2 games set back-to-back career highs for himself with 20 and then 21. So take us through what the stats are telling you about Steph Castle and his impact on this team.
Yeah, like I said, when I saw that he was the 12th best player in the country, I was like, wow, whoa, where did that come from, right?
Yeah, exactly.
He's rocketed up. And it's really actually been, I think, I looked at since January 1st or January 2nd was when UConn played their first game in this calendar year. And that's really where he started to emerge. He's averaging almost 14 points a game, 5 rebounds a game, and 4 assists per game since January 1st. And the two stats I really like are his efficiency. He's shooting about 50% on his twos and 39% on his threes. So now we know that was the big issue when he started. He was just cold. He was taking bricks. You cringed when you saw him take a 3-pointer, and he didn't take very many. Right. So he started the season. He was 2 for 13 on threes. And then over his last 6 games, he's now 8 for 18. So that's 44%. And he's made at least 1 3-pointer in each of those games. And, as it's been kind of reported, and a lot of people have noticed that now that he's making these threes, they really have to respect him.
Right.
His game. They can't just sag off him. And what he's done is he's been able to get to the rim a lot. So his rim rate, his percentage of field goals taken at the rim is now, I think, almost 55%. Which is only behind Sampson and Clingan, who obviously, that's all they do.
Basically everything.
Right? Yeah. So 55% is a very good number for a guard. It shows that they're penetrating, and he's really getting into the paint. So, I mean, I love what he's doing right now. And then also his impact on defense has been incredible. If you look at it, so there's a site called hoopexplorer.com, which lets you look at on-off court metrics, and a lot of them. But just the most basic one, the defense, the points allowed per 100 possessions, right? His defensive rating, it's 10 points better when he's on the court versus when he's off the court, which is surprisingly the best on the team right now.
Wow. Yeah.
Better than Clingan. It's better than anyone else. So I think, his impact on both ends of the court has been just, incredible. And if he's probably, he's maybe not freshman of the year nationally because Reed Shepherd and, Jacoby Walter and a bunch of other players have a little bit more playing time. They have some more gaudy stats, right? But I mean, he's the second best freshman behind Reed Shepherd in those player ratings. So he's clearly been the best freshman in the Big East.
Yeah.
I mean, we got to admit that.
Yeah. Took home another Big East player or freshman of the week.
Oh, did he today? Yeah, of course.
Keeps racking those up.
I think he's up to 6 now.
Yeah. I think today was 6.
How many weeks have we had?
Yeah. So it just goes to show you what he's been able to do this season. And I think both offensively and defensively, it really stands out, because it seems like for a little bit, it's just, hey, if he could give you some good defense and whatever he makes. Now that he's been able to kind of put everything together there, I think it just goes to show why he's jumping up these rankings to where he is right now. Another guy that I had mentioned that I want to talk to you about is Donovan Clingan. Obviously, came into the season with high expectations. We saw him in glimpses last year in some, smaller minutes, what he was able to do. This year comes in, wasn't 100% healthy from the start, misses probably a month there with the foot injury in the middle of the season. Take us through some of these Donovan stats. And I know a lot has been made of the difference of, especially defensively with him on and off the court.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the most obvious thing. I mean, his offensive impact has been, I think, minimal, good at best, right? Which is fine.
Yeah.
But where he really can impact the team is on the defense. And I mentioned that site Hoop Explorer earlier about the on-off court metrics. And there were 3 things that really stood out for me. The first one was the opponent's free throw rate. So foul, how much is UConn fouling, right? And with him on the court, the opponent free throw rate is only 29%, right? And this is a rate of free throws attempts per field goal attempts per team, right? That's what I'm talking about here, free throw rate. With him off the court, it's 40%. So basically what he allows UConn to do is play defense without fouling, which is the best kind of defense, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So that's one thing I wanted to point out. The second one was the rate of 2-pointers attempts at the rim. So how often are teams getting to the rim and attempting shots? This one's pretty incredible. So 37% with him on the court, 48% with him off the court.
Yeah.
More than 10 percentage points increase. And so what that means is that teams are forced to take more 2-point attempts in the mid-range, which are basically the most inefficient shots.
Right, exactly.
Right. So with him on the court, teams are forced to take 30% of their shots are 2-point attempts in the mid-range.
Yeah.
With him off the court, it's only 21% that teams are doing. So basically what he's doing is he's letting UConn play defense without fouling, which is awesome, right? And he's not letting teams take shots really close to the rim, which go in a lot.
Right.
And he's forcing them to take shots in the 2-point in the mid-range, which don't go in a lot.
Yeah.
And are very inefficient. I mean, when you put that all together, like
that's the key to successful defense, I think.
That's a good defense, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's hard to fault that. And kind of just like the overarching. So I looked at defensive efficiency, and on a site called barttorvik.com, which people probably are familiar with, you can kind of you can break the efficiency stats by date range.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's really, really helpful. So I looked at it from December 21st to January 16th, which was that stretch they played without Clingan.
Right.
UConn's adjusted defensive efficiency was 111th in the country in those games. Now they won all of them, which is good, but the defense was 111th in the country. So, and then since January 17th, so since Donovan has come back, that first game, I believe it was Creighton, right?
Yeah.
They have the second best adjusted defensive efficiency.
Quite the jump.
I mean, those stats are pretty incredible for the impact of. I mean, you can't say it's one player, but it's probably
one player.
Probably one player.
I'm going to take a quick break from the interview to tell you about my friends at Martin Rosol's Meats. This 4th-generation Connecticut family business produces kielbasa, hot dogs, sausages, and deli meats using Martin Rosol's very own original recipes. Their products can be found in grocery stores, delis, restaurants, and hot dog stands throughout the state. And if you're looking for your fill right away, check out their retail store in New Britain. For more information, visit martinroselsinc.com and go support a UConn fan-owned business. And now, back to the interview. No, that's crazy. I mean, each stat you've been going and rattling off throughout this podcast, I'm just like more and more impressed by this team. With each stat, it's like, wow, each one just gets better and better. I know when we first started talking about this, we mentioned the idea of this team statistically being better than last year's team. Compare these two teams for me a little bit from what those stats are showing and what you're seeing there.
Yeah. So I looked at, what they had done through 22 games last year.
Yep.
Right. So that's what they're at right now. And obviously last year's included that January swoon.
Yeah.
Right. So at this point last year, through 22 games, they were 16-6. But they were 6th in KenPom at this point. Mm-hmm. So their efficiency metrics were really good. They were and we remember they were blowing a lot of teams out right at the beginning of the season in the non-conference schedule. But I mean, that's what they did, right? And so that helped their efficiency metrics. So they were actually 6th in KenPom. And they were a little bit more balanced. I looked at it, and at that point, through 22 games, they were 10th in adjusted offensive efficiency, 13th in adjusted defensive efficiency. Right now, UConn is 3rd in adjusted offensive efficiency this season, 15th in adjusted defensive efficiency. Now we know that those numbers are a little bit skewed, the defensive one especially because of Clingan, right? But they have a higher adjusted efficiency margin this year, actually. So they're outscoring their opponents right now. This is according to adjusted efficiency margin, which is 100 points per possession.
Okay.
Per 100 possessions.
Yep.
Adjusted for this schedule. So they're at 28.7 right now.
Wow.
And then last year through 22 games, they're at 25.6. So, and this is all data from KenPom. In case people didn't realize that. And one other interesting thing was that I looked at. KenPom has this thing called he puts these tier A and tier B games.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so which is kind of like it's not great, but it's a little. I like it better than the net. The net's just whatever.
yeah.
But what it basically is I think it's top 50 at home or top 100 on the road is an A game.
Okay.
Um, in the top 100 meaning like a KenPom rating,
Yep,
right?
exactly.
Okay. So this year, UConn is actually they're 8-2 so far in A games, which
Pretty
is
impressive.
really good. They were 5-5 last year in A games at this point.
Yeah. Okay.
So a lot of those losses. So they didn't have as many quality wins, and they had a bunch of. Obviously, we know about what happened in January last year. They had a bunch of those losses. Those
Right.
were all A game losses,
Yeah.
essentially. Most of them. Um, so yeah, so the metrics are saying that they're better, which is incredible. I mean, we know we don't. I'm not saying that they're run away in the tournament and do whatever. The
Yeah.
tournament's a whole different beast. But if you're looking at regular season performance right now,
Yeah.
UConn is playing better at this point in the season than they were last year.
Yeah. Wow. We've talked about a lot of good, and I didn't know you mentioned that there are still some faults within this team. So as you're looking at this team, if you see a weakness or two, what is that? What are the stats showing that that is?
I mean, the stats are kind of saying that they foul too much.
Hmm.
Um, but I mean that obviously can be because of the impact of Clingan. The stats would say that their 3-point shooting has been not as good, or their 3-point defense has
Hmm.
been not terrific.
Okay.
Um, but I mean, I don't really look at 3-point. I mean, the thing is, you can't really look at 3-point field goal percentage as a predictive stat.
Yeah.
It's more of what it is that if it's the amount of attempts that you're allowing your opponents to shoot from threes.
Hmm.
And UConn is actually very good at that. So the theory goes is, and this is kind of more some of the more advanced metrics are saying that, it doesn't 3-point field goal percentage defense is not very predictive.
Hmm.
That teams they can get very streaky against you or not streaky. But the real predictive measure for 3-point defense is actually the number of attempts, the percentage of attempts that
Huh.
you allow. And
Yeah.
UConn rates very highly in that. They don't allow very many 3-point attempts. So I'm not too worried about that. I'm also not super worried about the foul stuff. They seem to be able to weather that. I mean, Clingan and Sampson both had 4 fouls for like
Yeah.
90% of the game
Yeah.
against St.
Both
John,
St. John's and Providence. Yeah.
right, and Providence, right, and they seem to do okay in those
Yeah.
games. Um,
Yeah, we could just blame the
so
Big East refs for a little of that, jacking that number up there a little bit. But
yeah, I
yeah.
mean, and UConn does play at a very slow pace, which you kind of wonder about their ability to play against a fast team. They haven't really had to do that very much this season.
Hmm.
So, maybe a team like, I mean, Kentucky. I mean, Kentucky has their other issues. They have a
Yeah.
lot of defensive issues, but a team like that, or I think Kansas is a team that played pretty fast, and they struggled in that game as well. So I think that I don't see tempo as like a super predictive stat, but it
Right.
is something to think about that because they do play at such a deliberate pace. If they are forced to get sped up, what's going to happen there? And I think that playing at a very deliberate pace can obviously plays to a lot of their advantages because they run such terrific sets on
Right.
offense,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
they just wear the opponent down. But if a team, they're good, they're pretty good in transition too. Um, but yeah, the tempo thing is another. I don't know if it's a weakness, but it's another characteristic of this team that is something that you have to look out for.
Yeah. As we head towards, kind of this down the stretch part of the season, and you look at the field as a whole nationally, just from these statistical looks that you've been given, how does UConn compare to some of those other national title contenders that they tend to be looped in with?
Yeah, I mean, I think they compare really favorably. Obviously, they're third in KenPom, and a lot of the other teams that are in the top, in the top 5, I would say in the top 10 are pretty balanced like them as well. Like, Houston is
Hmm.
they're first in defense, but they're 18th in offense. Purdue is first in offense, 13th in defense. UConn's third, I said, in offense, 15th in defense. Arizona is another top. The metrics love Arizona. They're fifth in offense and 12th in defense. I think, where really UConn, like I said before, where they really separate themselves is really in that depth.
Yeah.
Um, and no other team can kind of has the depth of UConn. They may be as balanced as UConn offensively and defensively on efficiency on both
Yeah.
ends. But I think it's the ability of if UConn has shown the ability to weather games without their best players.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm not sure other teams have really had either had to do that or have done that yet. Right. I mean, if you look at it, like literally they've played games without Clingan, without Donovan Clingan, without Alex Caravan, and without Steph Castle, who those three players may be their best three
Right.
players
Yeah.
on the team, right? If
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
were kind of looking at I mean, Tristan Newton, yes, he's been terrific, and
Yeah.
he's probably one of their, maybe top three players as well. But yeah, I mean, it's just I think that's where UConn really sets themselves apart.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean when you talked earlier about the five guys in that top 31 there, it's hard to say who are the top three players. I mean they're all bunched so close together that
yeah,
it's really hard to differentiate.
is Cam Spencer your fifth best player? I mean,
Yeah.
the guy just led the team in scoring. He had 23 points against St. John's, and
Yeah.
he's the best 3-point shooter. How is he their fifth best player, right? And
Yeah.
the way that he impacts the game, both not even in the box score, right? Things like
Yeah.
that. It's just I don't know. I can't.
I, I'll wrap with this one for you. We're gonna put this out in advance of the game against Butler on Tuesday. What have you been able to cook up on this Butler team? A stat or something to look for heading into this game? This game.
Yeah. This is actually a really intriguing game for me. Butler is a fascinating team. And I kind of just wanted to. I looked at just conference play statistics
Yeah.
because it can be kind of skewed with the non-conference stuff. So they've got a really good offense in conference play. So they're the third best offensive efficiency in the Big East
Oh
in
wow.
conference play, which is when
Pretty
UConn,
good. Yeah.
right up there with UConn. It's basically, and the one thing that stood out to me was that they have the lowest turnover rate. So you're not gonna be able to get those turnovers and force, to get the transition points or anything
Yeah.
like that. They're just not gonna make any mistakes,
Hmm.
right, on offense. Now their defense is, they're about eighth or ninth in the conference in defense. Um, but so I mean that's where probably UConn is going to win the game because their offense is just incredible, and if Butler can't stop them, it's going to be tough for them to outscore UConn.
Yeah.
But the other intriguing thing about Butler is that they've defeated both Creighton and Marquette on the road already this season.
Yeah.
So they're not gonna be fazed by anything. Those are the two other best teams in the Big East, right?
Right.
And they beat them both on the road.
Yeah.
Um,
Which is impressive.
so
Yeah. Usually that it's when the teams come to Hinkle that they run into some trouble.
right. So it's
Take them out
really
on the road is impressive.
it's been really impressive that they've been able to do that, and those have been really tough games too.
Yeah.
I think they were at least one of them was in overtime. I'm not sure about the Marquette game. Can't
Yeah.
remember if it was a very close game though, but they just beat Creighton in overtime,
Yeah.
right? Uh, in their last game. So, yeah, I'm really excited to see this. I think it's gonna be a great atmosphere.
Yeah. And
And
when you think about it too, they probably should have won at Providence too, and that was with Bryce Hopkins against Providence.
yeah,
They just didn't
exactly.
foul
Yep,
up three with 2 seconds left or whatever it was, and it burned them. So I
yep.
mean, I think that's really impressive when you bring that up there in terms of what they've been able to do on the road. But Katie, I really appreciate the time. Everyone, go give Katie a follow. She's putting stats out throughout the season, especially as we're coming into baseball season too. If you're a Yankees fan, you're going to really like what she's putting out there. So, Katie,
Yep.
just plug where everyone can find you to make sure that they're staying in touch with you throughout the seasons.
Yep. I am on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. It's KT, so the letters ktsharp. Um, just yeah, and just follow me. I try and post stats. Try and post good stats, but also some bad stats if something bad happens. So but yeah, Yankees and Huskies are two of the big things that I like to do. So
Yeah, no, all great stuff, and they're accessible so everyone can understand what she's talking about. So,
yep.
always enjoy being able to see analytics and stats in that kind of setting. So, Katie, I really appreciate you taking some time to come on the podcast. Thanks so much for coming back on, and we'll definitely have to make it less of a gap than we did the first time when we have you on again. So, thanks so much.
All right. Yep. Thanks again. Really enjoyed it.